Hey, welcome, AP Government Video. What I want to do is go over this briefly with you. It is consulting the Constitution. It just familiarizes you with our Constitution. That's a big point of Chapter 2. You did it. I will scan this and send it to you so you can check it. And I'll put the right answers in. But I do want to then go over some of them with you right now as well. I'll probably go at length on just a few of them so that you're aware of why it's the right answer, not just what the right answer is. Number one, bills raising revenue must originate in the House of Representatives. That is true. That is Article 1, Section 7. Just a little bit of a background on that. Article 1 is going to be the legislative branch. That's a fairly long section of the Constitution you may know already, but that's going to be the legislative branch. Article 2 is going to be the executive branch and the Electoral College, a little bit shorter. And then the third, Article 3, is the court system, which is really quite short. The Constitution didn't have a lot on the court system other than to describe the Supreme Court. And then we have added in other layers of courts later, which we'll learn about in that Unit 5 on the judicial branch right at the end of this class period. Congress must meet at least once a year. That's Article 1, Section 4. That is true, by the way. Each state controls export duties on all goods produced in that state. That is false, and that would be Article 1, Section 10. And we're going to get to that whole idea of federalism a bit more in just a second. The president may suspend a writ of habeas corpus in election years. That is false. That's Article 1, Section 9. Okay. The federal government controls transportation amongst the states. That is true. That is Article 1, Section 8. I want to talk a little bit about Article 1, Section 8, just for a few minutes here. Article 1, Section 8 is an incredibly important section of the Constitution because that article and that section lists 18 powers that is given to, and it calls it Congress, but it's really to the federal government. Okay. We sometimes are going to call those enumerated powers. I don't know if you want to write that next to that, but Article 1, Section 8, enumerated powers, it lists what Congress has the power to do. Okay. That's going to come up later in lots of different ways. So we just want to remember that enumerated powers, Article 1, Section 8, and in just a little while, I'll probably mention it again. So hopefully you can get that. And then Article or number 6, each state is free to determine its own form of government and enter into treaties. That is true as well. I'm sorry. That's false. What am I thinking? Article 1, Section 10. What it says there is that the government, each state must provide for a Republican-style government. That's what we talked about today in our Socratic seminar, and it's also in the Constitution. So sorry, I messed that one up for you. Number 7, the Supreme Court is the only federal court. That is false. That's Article 3, Section 1. What the Constitution says is that Congress may determine other forms of courts or lower courts. They may establish lower courts. Congress may override a presidential veto by 2/3 of both houses. This is number 8. That is true. That's Article 1, Section 7. And so that shows how a bill becomes a law. We'll talk about that in the legislative branch. The Senate must approve all presidential appointments. This is number 9. That is true. Article 2, Section 2. One thing I want you to maybe write next to that one is to write the word advise and consent. That is a huge power that Congress has to the president, to advise the president and to consent to the president, advise and consent. And it's not only Congress, but it's specifically the Senate. So you may want to write Senate, advise, and consent there. Those are themes that we are going to talk about later. Okay? And that's something that the Senate has even more power than the House does. Only Congress may declare war. That is true. That is Article 1, Section 8. Like I said, those are those 18 enumerated powers that are listed. And one is Congress has the power to declare war. Just as kind of a foreshadowing of what we're going to talk about. Yes, Congress has the power to declare war, but the president has the power to enact war. And right now we're kind of in this, there's all kinds of situations where the president steps in and provides troops, but there is no declaration of war because the president would say this isn't a war. This is just something else. Maybe a military action, maybe, there's a variety of names that could be used for it. So just know that around number 10. Number 11, the states may grant titles of nobility. That is false. That's the reason why we rebelled from England. We're back here on the board here. We're staying away from kings. We want republics. As part of that, again, part of that fear that we would kind of go back to a king was, okay, let's ban titles of nobility so that people aren't tempted to create these hierarchies. It's also a very Enlightenment idea. We talk about the Enlightenment being kind of some of that groundwork for our Constitution. Okay. Number 12, it says Long Island could decide to become a state if New York agreed. That's number 12. That is false. That is Article 4, Section 3. In that, it talks about what is needed to become a state, and it lists out some of the issues of it. So we'll just leave it at that for now. It is left to each state to determine the punishment for counterfeiting. This is number 13. This is false, and it is Article 1, Section 8. Again, that's those listed, those 18 enumerated powers. And one was that Congress has the power to to mint and coin money. And so it's basically saying that that's left for the federal government. States may not mint and coin money. So that is given to the federal government, not to the states. The next one is the president is commander in chief of the military only during wartime. That is false. That is Article 2, Section 2. The president is commander in chief all the time. So that's why that one is false. Number 15, each state can decide whether to follow laws passed by Congress. That is false. Article 1, Section 8. That's those enumerated powers again, where we are told, this is what the federal government does. And I'll leave it at that. Number 16, the president makes all treaties, but they must be approved by 2/3 of the Senate. That is true. That is Article 2, Section 2. Again, Article 2 talks about the powers of the president. The president does have the power to make treaties, but again, that advise and consent that I talked about earlier, they then must get the Senate to approve them. Okay, now when we talk about the presidency in Unit 4, we will talk about the fact that the president can do other executive actions where they work with other countries that don't really qualify as a treaty, and so they kind of miss that level of a treaty. But treaties have to be signed by 2/3 of the Senate, not just Congress, the Senate. Number 17, the president can grant a pardon for a federal crime. That is true. That's Article 2, Section 2. The president has that great power. President Trump has already used that a couple times in some somewhat controversial ways. By the way, at the end of most presidencies, that's when they do offer a lot of pardons. President Obama, at the end of his term, commuted and pardoned a lot of people. Mainly for drug offenses that people thought were overly harsh and things like that. President Trump has used it in a bit more controversial ways. And we may get into that when we talk about the presidency later. I'm finding my spot here. Number 18, the vice president is president of the Senate, but only votes in a tie. That is true. That is Article 1, Section 3. Number 19, the Constitution may be changed if 2/3 of Congress and all the states agree. That is incorrect. And that would be Article 5. Article 5 describes two ways that we can amend our Constitution. And all the states do not have to agree. Only 3/4 of them have to agree. So there's a bit of a technicality there. So that may seem unfair if you wrote true, but it would only have to be 3/4 of the states. Number 20, 1787, the Constitution required that 10 states ratify it to take effect. Again, this is a weird one. It's a technicality. It is false. Only 9, not 10 of the states had to ratify the Constitution. So you can write down false there. Number 21, each state has the same number of electors as it has representatives and senators. That is true. That's Article 2, Section 1. We'll talk about it when we talk about the Electoral College as well. So hopefully we'll come back to this a bit later. Number 21, number 22, if the president doesn't sign a bill within 10 days, it cannot become a law. This is a bit of a technicality as well, so you may want to listen as I explain this. If a bill is presented before the president and they don't sign it in 10 days, it becomes law. It is law. That time period eclipses, and then the assumption is, well, the president just didn't sign it, so therefore he wasn't objecting to it. He or she wasn't objecting to it. However, there is a huge exception to this. If the Congress passes a law and it is 9 days or 10 days or less before the end of the Congress, so it's right before Congress ends, and then the president doesn't sign it, it dies. And so then it wouldn't become a law, but only if it's within that 10 days of the end of the Congress, which happens at the end of the 2 years before the election. That has a name and is called a pocket veto. There are a lot of multiple choice questions that kind of, play with this weird situation. So I'm being picky in this, but realize I'm being picky because it is a technicality that comes up a lot in multiple choice questions. So hopefully that makes sense to you. Number 23, in order to be convicted for treason, there must be 2 witnesses. That is true. That is Article 3, Section 2. Then number 24, it says, in order to become president, you must be born in the United States. That is true. That is Article 2, Section 1, where it talks about what you need to become president, and you must be born in the United States. A couple of huge notable exceptions. One was John McCain. John McCain was born in the Panama Canal area, which was part of the United States as a military base. That is a clear situation where he would become allowed to become president. The other situation that is a little bit unique was that Ted Cruz, who ran in 2016 as a conservative Republican, both of his parents were American, but they were actually in Canada when he was born. And most constitutional scholars agreed, and they were both liberal and conservative, so it wasn't like they were just siding with him because of their partisanship. But most conservatives and liberal constitutional scholars said he's okay because both of his parents were citizens and they were just working in Canada. What was interesting is during that campaign, Donald Trump, again, a bit of a out-of-the-box kind of guy, floated this idea like therefore he would be ineligible, therefore you shouldn't vote for him in the primary because he was born in Canada. By the way, that's the same tack that President Trump took against President Obama. He was very critical of Obama when Obama was president and said that he was born in Kenya. It was a bit of a conspiracy theory that Trump kind of fostered. And again, I think most people, even conservatives, would say, yeah, I'm not sure that was true at all. He was just, getting attention on Twitter or whatever. But those are what I want to say a little bit extra on that particular situation. So, and then the last one, the president is required to report to Congress on the State of the Union. That is true. It is Article 2, Section 3, where the Constitution says that every year the president must go and make a presentation before Congress on the State of the Union. That happens in January of every year. So Anyway, I hope that this assignment has got you looking through your Constitution. And then, and not all of these, but some of these, you can really start to understand some of the flow and the important ideas in our U.S. Constitution. And this becomes a framework for what we understand to be U.S. government. And again, constantly look back at that Constitution. Constantly, as we're going through this course, you can come back and then, look at that Constitution. So that's what I have to say for today. This is about a 15-minute video. I will upload this right now, and then you can also just know that you can look at the correct answers on this as well. And I hope you have a good evening. Thanks.